This is Professor Upfer, and this is the second part of the lecture on personality, origins, and development. So, where do our personalities come from anyway? Why are some of us extroverted or introverted? Why are some of us agreeable or disagreeable, competitive? Does this come from our genes, from some kind of experience, from some kind of choices that we're making? Where do our personalities come from? Well, let's take the first hypothesis that I think everybody comes up with, which is that our personalities are reflections of the particular genes that we have. I think this is a popular theory, and for good reason. Almost every individual difference that we've looked at has a heritable component. And it's true of personality too. So let's take the first personality trait, openness to new experience. If we look at the correlations of openness to experience for monozygotic twins who have 100% of their genes in common versus dizygotic twins who only have 50% of the genes in common, if the trait of openness were 100% heritable, then you would expect that the correlation for the monozygotic twins would be twice as much as that of dizygotic twins. And if you go through all of the specific components of openness, whether you're open to new fantasies or to new artwork or to new feelings or new actions or new ideas or new values, you find that the heritability, meaning the portion of variation that's attributable to shared genes, is between 0.3 and 0.5, or between 30 and 50%. If you look at conscientiousness, you find that the heritability ranges between 0.3 and 0.5. If you look at extroversion, you find that heritability ranges between about 0.3 and 0.5. And if you look at agreeableness, again, between about 0.3 and 0.5. And at neuroticism, again, the heritabilities range between around 0.3 and 0.5. So what this suggests is that between about 30% and 50% of the individual differences in personality traits, as measured by the Neo-Personality Inventory, which is the Big Five test, is attributable to shared genes. But 30 to 50% isn't everything. All right, so even for a trait like extroversion, where shared genes account for 53% of the variance, that doesn't leave the other percent being 47%. To know about the effect of the shared environment, you have to look at twins reared together versus twins reared apart. And there you only find that about 9% of variance is caused by growing up in the same house. That leaves another 38% of individual differences in extroversion completely unexplained. So genes are doing a lot of the work. The environment is doing some of the work, at least the shared environment. But that last part, what's sometimes called the non-shared environment, the things in our upbringing that make us different from our siblings. So maybe your older sibling had one teacher and you had a different teacher. Maybe your older sibling made one choice and you made a different choice. Or the fact that your older sibling is older. Or maybe the fact that your older sibling is a man or a woman. All of these, and therefore have associated experiences with being a man or a woman, would all contribute to the effect of the non-shared environment, which is a bit of a misnomer, because it also includes choices and measurement error. So that's led to other hypotheses about why we have the personality we do. Maybe there's an effect of age. Maybe there's an effect of sex. Maybe there's an effect of birth order. Let's go over some of these other hypotheses. So to begin with, what is the effect of age on personality? One thing that I think is really remarkable is that when you look at newborn infants, newborn infants aren't all clones of each other. They react differently to their environment. Some newborns are born crying. Others open up their eyes and are amazed. They're not all the same. Some are alert, some are sleepy, and so on. We also know that you don't have to be a person to have a personality. There are certain personality differences among individual dogs and cats and other living things. So personality seems to have a kind of a non-cognitive component that is present at birth. Well, that's just the sense that we have, sort of the mother's wisdom that they could tell their kid's personality even when they were born. But let's look at the actual evidence. All right. Well, first off, how are we going to assess personality in a baby? All right. Well, in adults, we know that personality differences show up most clearly in situations that are novel, ambiguous, and stressful. In these situations, we see the biggest individual differences. And the same is true of babies. So if we put babies in a situation that's novel, ambiguous, and a little bit stressful, maybe we'll start to see some differences between the babies. Well, one way that we do this is in what's known as a temperament inventory. So here what happens is a baby is brought into the lab and they are sort of seated in this nice car seat and buckled in. And it's a novel environment, this laboratory. It's ambiguous. They don't exactly know what they are supposed to do. And then a very mild stressor is brought out. Maybe it'll be a toy that is at the end of a string, and the toy is sort of moved back and forth slowly around the baby. And you look at how the baby interacts in this situation. And what we find is that babies' reactions to these novel, ambiguous, slightly stressful events correlate with many of the same outcomes predicted by personality factors. So, for example, a lot of babies really react negatively to novelty. As soon as the toy comes out, they burst into tears. Right? Well, if you follow up these babies later in adulthood, it predicts internalization of negative events. That's the idea that some bad thing happened to you because you're a bad person. All right. In addition to this, these reactions in the temperament test are linked to personality traits much later on. Right? So one thing that we see in the temperament test is that babies differ in their energy level. So some babies are highly energetic and moving around, and other babies are sort of lethargic and sit there like a bump on a pickle. And activity is positively related to extroversion and negatively related to agreeableness and conscientiousness. Another thing that we see in the temperament test is that babies differ in how inhibited they are, how fearful or shy or withdrawn they are with respect to the experimenter. All right. This seems to be positively related to neuroticism and negatively related to extroversion. Still, another difference among babies is their persistence. So some babies, when they see the toy, they pay attention to it and they follow the toy as it moves back and forth and back and forth. They're not distractible from it and they show interest in it. We call this persistence, their attention span, their distractibility, and their interest. And it's positively correlated with adult agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness to experience. So what we seem to have here is a kind of synthesis, right? Which is that what genes do is they code for the production of a set of hormones and neurotransmitters that lead to a certain kind of temperament, a certain kind of individual difference in the reaction to novel stimuli. And these temperament differences, how inhibited or active or persistent the baby is, can be thought of as a kind of proto-personality trait. All right. And what age and experience might do is to help mold these proto-personality traits into enduring ones. Now, it should be noted that personality is not set in early childhood. All right. There are some changes that occur from childhood to adolescence. So one thing that we observe is that adolescents begin to demonstrate much more emotional autonomy from their parents. Right? This is a kind of emotional self-regulation and control, as well as a feeling of being more independent of their parents and less idealistic about their parents. In addition, adolescents demonstrate less emotional autonomy from their peers. As a matter of fact, resistance to peer pressure plummets from 5th grade to 8th grade. In addition, adolescent males often engage in what's known as group risk-taking. So teen males might join their peers in getting in fights or irresponsible driving, or in hunter-gatherer societies, climbing trees too fast. You can sort of imagine a group of teen hunter-gatherers climbing trees too fast in the way that their Western counterparts might engage in drag racing in the streets. In addition, there are some changes that happen from adolescence to adulthood. So between the late teens and about 30 years of age, people typically become, well, let's go through this. We have openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. I wonder, if, just mentally, what would be your prediction? Do we become more or less open to new experiences as we go from the late teens to age 30? Do we become more or less conscientious? More or less extroverted? More or less agreeable? More or less neurotic? I'm sure you could probably come up with an argument as to why it might be either one of these. Typically, if we were meeting in class, I would have an opportunity to hear some of your reasons, and what I generally find is that people have any one of these ideas. But this is why we actually do empirical studies, is to find out what are the facts. And this is what we find, is that over time, people do not become less open, so openness sort of stays the same. People become a lot more conscientious between the late teens and 30. They become a little less extroverted. They become a bit more agreeable, and they become much less neurotic. Now, this is kind of interesting. We become more conscientious, more directed. We keep our promises. We become more responsible. We become a little less extroverted, a little less like we have something to prove to everybody else, a little more agreeable, a little less competitive, but a lot more emotionally stable, more Zen-like, more calm. You know, there's a name for this set of changes. There's a name for this set of changes, becoming more conscientious, more emotionally stable, a little less extroverted, and a little more agreeable. We call it psychological maturity. And it's borne out in the data. That term, acting mature or being mature, really is something that changes with age between the late teens and age 30. But those aren't the only changes that happen. Right? So beyond 30, if you look at age shown on the x-axis, starting at age 21 all the way up to age 60. We have these two series. The diamonds are the mean scores of women on this test of openness, and the black squares are the mean scores of men on this test of openness. What we find is that after age 30, we begin to see that people become less open to new experience. And there are some differences overall between men being a little bit more open than women in their early 30s, but those differences diminish over time. Then there's conscientiousness, OC. Here we again see that conscientiousness increases from 21 to 30, and it keeps on increasing from 30 to 60. The other thing that we see is that women at every age, except for maybe 60, are more conscientious on average than men are. As a matter of fact, if you look at age 30, a woman's level of conscientiousness at age 30, on average, is about the same level of conscientiousness as a man at about the age of 45. So that's a pretty big gender difference. Another is agreeableness. All right. Not a lot of change in agreeableness between 21 and 30. People become a little bit more agreeable. When you really start to see the changes in agreeableness is after the age of 30. After the age of 30, both men and women become more agreeable. Again, women tend to be more agreeable than men, so that a 30-year-old woman is, again, about as agreeable as a 42-year-old man. Then there's neuroticism. Neuroticism tends to be fairly flat for men, but it declines enormously for women. If we do the same comparison and we compare the level of neuroticism for the average 30-year-old woman, there is no age at which a man shows that same level of neuroticism. I'm just reporting the data. And then there's extroversion. Again, women tend to be a bit more extroverted than men, but it tends to be fairly stable over time, and the differences are a lot smaller than the other traits. Okay, so that suggests something right off the bat. We've seen these gender differences in personality traits, and people wonder what might be behind it. Well, we do know that there are gender-specific experiences. So babies are already being treated in gender-specific ways according to what their sex is. One of the most powerful ways of demonstrating this was conducted in a number of studies. So first off, we know that fathers describe girl newborns as soft, small, and beautiful, whereas they describe boy newborns as firm, strong, and well coordinated. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen a newborn, but there is no newborn that is firm, strong, and well coordinated. So we know that when fathers are describing girl newborns and boy newborns in these ways, they have to be hallucinating the strength and well coordination and firmness of their boy newborns. All right. The other is we know that mothers too are treating children in gender-specific ways. In one study, mothers were asked to hold an infant. All right. Now, unbeknownst to the mothers, it was exactly the same infant that was either dressed like a girl who was called Beth or as a boy named Adam. So again, there's no difference objectively between Beth and Adam. It's just that the moms thought this is a girl versus a boy. And the moms talked more to Beth than Adam and gave Adam more direct gazes unaccompanied by talk. If you can sort of imagine that mom look of a direct gaze unaccompanied by talk, the kind of thing that should make your stomach sink. And later, adults also give more aid and comfort to girls while expecting boys to be more self-reliant. For example, in one study, college students were in the laboratory and they heard over the loudspeaker that an infant was crying. In half of the cases, the infant was described as a girl, and in half of the cases, the infants were described as a boy. But otherwise, the call that the college students heard was exactly the same. And the college students were quicker to call for help if the crying infant was a girl rather than a boy. Also, when 2-year-olds were given a problem task in still another study, moms were more likely to aid their daughters than their sons. And this isn't just boys and girls who are being treated differently by their parents or by college students. Children themselves actively promote sex-segregated play, especially for boys. So if you look at children's spontaneous play, you'll often see that there's a group of girls playing together. And if a boy tries to join in their play, they sort of push him away or move over to where the teacher is and ask for help so that the boy will go away. Whereas when boys are playing together and a girl tries to enter the group, they don't push her away, but they kind of just ignore her. And so this is, again, something that the children themselves are doing to enforce these gender norms. It's not all coming from the parents. Now, there's a whole lot more to say about gender differences, but this just gives you a taste that there are ways that boys and girls are being treated differently that might be related to some of the sex differences that we see later on. But I'm sure that hormones matter too. For example, we know that testosterone rises and falls in boys. And we also know that boys are less agreeable and more antagonistic and pugilistic and competitive and argumentative than girls are. And as males' testosterone begins to wane, all right, boys tend to become more agreeable. All right. But again, both groups become more agreeable too. All right. Now, the last hypothesis that people have put forward is the idea that birth order makes a difference in personality. This was popularized when I was an undergraduate by a book called Born to Rebel by Frank Sulloway. He proposed the idea that older siblings and younger siblings have each a kind of niche and a set of motivations that differentiates them from their siblings. So just as an example, I show you here a baby swallow. This baby swallow is the first baby to hatch in its nest. And the first thing that a baby swallow does when it hatches is it goes over to the other eggs in the nest and begins to get underneath them and try to push them out of the nest on their back. And they do this until either all of the eggs have been smashed on the ground or the other eggs hatch and the swallow doesn't have a chance to do it. Now you can see why this kind of innate behavior might have been selected for. Think about it from the point of view of the baby swallow that you see here. Initially, at birth, the swallow effectively gets 100% of all of the worms that mom will bring that back to the nest. It's 100% parental investment. If another one of those eggs hatches, the swallow's worms gets cut in half, and then to a third, and then to a fourth. Every one of those eggs is a division of how many worms the swallow is going to get. And so the idea that Sulloway put forward is maybe something like that is operating in humans and would explain some differences in the personality of children based on their birth order. But a number of doubts about Sulloway's theory has emerged over time. And I think the best way to look at these doubts is with respect to a cartoon that was done in XKCD, I think is the name of the cartoon. So here's a person comes in and says, hey, jelly beans cause acne. The person says, scientists, investigate. All right. So the scientists go away and they say, oh, we found no link between jelly beans and acne. Probability is greater than 1 in 20. That's subtle stat. Then the person says, oh, but I hear it's only a certain color that causes it. Scientists, so they have to go back to work. And so then in these next panels, you see them saying that they found no link between purple jelly beans and brown jelly beans and pink jelly beans and blue jelly beans and all of these different ones of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times 4 of 20. They did 20 comparisons and they found no differences. Actually, they did find one difference. They found a difference between green jelly beans, all right, but not among any of these other colors. Now, this is a joke because if there's a 1 in 20% chance, just by chance, that you're going to get a difference, when you find 1 out of 20 times that there's a difference, that's exactly what you would expect from chance. And we often find that there are sometimes a difference in personality between older siblings and younger siblings, but it tends to be sort of opportunistic like this. And the reason why we know this and why we shouldn't conclude that jelly beans are linked to acne, all right, comes from a recent study that actually one of your classmates pointed out to me in the Improve the Textbook exercise. Here they alerted me to the article Probing Birth Order Effects on Narrow Traits Using Specification Curve Analysis. And what specification curve analysis is a statistical technique that allows you to sort of suss out those chance level above chance statistics. All right. And when you do that, what you find is that previously reported birth order effect on intellect, no meaningful effects on life satisfaction, locus of control, interpersonal trust, reciprocity, risk-taking, patience, impulsivity, or political orientation, all of which Sulloway had reported. So it looks like the idea that birth order affects personality might be about as likely as the idea that green jelly beans cause acne. Okay. So in summary, we've seen that even at birth, there are individual differences in how we react to the world around us. And that with age and experience, our temperaments develop into an increasingly stable and mature personality. In the next lecture, we'll look at that last thing, not just how our personalities and effect of our experiences, but what role might we play in shaping our own personalities over time.